Kyle. I work for a company, I'm managing part of a company in the London market that is active in export, trade finance and export finance, both in the UK and here. So I've already experienced some tensions, some challenges, but also some positive developments. So I hope I'll be able to share these with you. I'd like to thank the embassy for hosting us here, as always, in this pleasant area. And before we get into the topics, I would like to all welcome you for the future meetings of the public policy group that is dealing with the issues of public domain. We're helping our members to navigate through complex environment of public policy issues such as justice, such as fair trade, such as reform of economic environment and business environment. So we're trying to be active in this environment. We had a couple of ministers here over the last 10 to 12 months, and the governor of the central bank. So these are very interesting meetings. You are all welcome to join us for future meetings. My last points concern the practical implications of Brexit. And as I explained, I do work in the sort of trade finance export area. And after the Brexit happened, the second day I got about 10 phones from my clients who are exporters, banks, and Central Eastern European export trade agencies. What is happening? Are the contracts still valid? Can we still rely on what we have agreed? What is going to happen to the UK economy? And I was trying to say, calm down. The UK has always been able to cope with difficult situations. This is a challenge, but I'm sure things will be all right. And what has happened since then? The situation really calmed down. The clients are not calling me anymore. I think everybody seems to be comfortable with the economy and with the developments. And the British government, and again, I'm not a Brit, so I'm just sort of sad, has made the right noises about how they are going to handle the situation. The smooth transition between Cameron and Theresa May, and in charge of Theresa May, I think it was a good point. The Bank of England made the proper noises, said they would support the economy, they would cut down the rates, they would do all they can to keep the single passport for the British financial industry. So from that respect, I think the situation really calmed down. On the other hand, the trade patterns between the EU and the UK, or the trade relations, are very strong. And I will have 2 or 3 slides at the end of my little presentation. But by far, the UK is the least dependent on trading with the EU. My country has got 85, maybe close to 90% dependence on trade with the European Union. Britain has got about 45, I think you've got some slides there as well. And what I do see, because we're also trading with some of the old friends, or as Brits call it, cousins, with people in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, some of the African states, the old Commonwealth countries, or existing Commonwealth countries, we do see an increasing trend, at least from the Czech Republic, but I'm sure this will also be part of the UK sort of initiative, to get closer to these old patterns and maybe do a little more trade with these countries. So if I can ask for my 2 or 3 slides that I have, just to demonstrate on pictures. Okay, this slide, I think the most important numbers are here. The UK represents 8% of exports within the EU, but 17% outside of the EU. i.e. that says that Britain is really the biggest exporter to non-EU countries out of the EU, i.e. the biggest EU exporter to non-EU. So that says 70% of the EU, whereas just within the EU is 8%. Next slide. there's another one. With the deficit of trade, i.e. UK is exporting 220 billion sterling to the EU, whereas the other way, there's only 290 billion. Funnily enough, the UK statistics and the EU statistics, they slightly differ. You can imagine which way. This is Deutsche, sorry about that, it's Germany. The trade between the UK and Germany, again, there's quite a deficit. Again, UK exports 60 billion, German exports to UK 100 billion. So I think that shows how the trade relations and trade patterns work. And then down here, the traditional markets that include, some countries from the Arab world, but also the cousins and Switzerland, the number is greater than the export to the EU. So I think the UK has got a very good balance, a well-balanced book of export, if you will. And therefore, there's no need for major panic. I like the story about the Commonwealth because when I started to trade with the Brits, I like the history and the traditions and the language and the law and the Queen, the things about that. If you look at the trends, in 2013, the volume of trade with the Commonwealth was close to 600 billion. There's going to be 1,000 billion in 2010, almost 3 billion in 2030. And more to the point, the Commonwealth countries are developing and growing, both from the industrial economic perspective, but also from the perspective of population. So there's quite an interesting trajectory and space for growth. Whereas the EU intra-trade, i.e. the entire trade in the EU was approximately 3.2 trillion of British pounds. So you can see the markets might be comparable very soon. And again, being a trader, I think there's a big opportunity to increase the trade flows between the countries and the Commonwealth countries mainly. So my last point will be about what is Brexit and what we should expect. And one of the Economist editors has said there's only one certainty about the Brexit, and that is that nothing is certain. So with that, I will pass the word to Jan, and she will tell us a little more about the uncertainties and certainties and my colleagues.
Very good, thank you, Petra. Now where shall I come to speak? Not there. Here? Yes, is that good? Yes, very good. Well, welcome everyone. Let me add my word of welcome to that of Petra. It's very nice to have you all here in the British Embassy, especially when the weather is so nice outside and you'd probably rather be doing something else. So it's really nice to have you all here to talk about Brexit. And maybe the first thing to say is that Brexit is definitely, well, nothing is certain. But Brexit is happening. So just in case you're in any doubt, Brexit is happening. So obviously we had our referendum earlier this year, and the margin was fairly narrow, 52 to 48, but it was a clear vote of the British people, and it is a clear mandate. 33 million people voted. So as Petra was saying, we have a new Prime Minister, Theresa May, and she has made clear that Brexit means Brexit. We're not all entirely sure what Brexit means, but Brexit means Brexit. So we're going to go ahead with that and make a success of it, as she has said. And so that's what we intend to do. But Brexit does not necessarily mean that we are turning our backs on Europe, of course. We still remain Europeans, we're still part of Europe, and for us, the EU will remain a really important and strategic partner. Both in terms of trade and investment, and also in terms of security and defence, for example. And there may be some areas, such as security and defence, where we may be looking to strengthen our relationship with the European Union and with our European Union partners. So it's kind of the end of one relationship, but it's the beginning of another. And I think it will be in both the UK's interest and the rest of the EU's interest to have a relationship that is as close as possible, both in terms of trade and in all kinds of other areas. So we approach the negotiations that are to come, the Article 50 negotiations, in a really constructive and positive spirit, with lots of goodwill and respect, and we hope they will be conducted in a really positive spirit. As you may have noticed, we are taking our time a little bit in triggering Article 50. We don't make any real apology for that, because I think it makes sense for us to consider carefully the direction in which we want to head. In the UK, the new Prime Minister has made a number of changes in the way our government runs itself. So we've elevated our trade agenda. We have a new Department for International Trade, a new Ministry for International Trade, and a new government department, a new ministry for exiting the European Union. So we're devoting a lot of time and attention to all of that. And our government is talking also to our devolved administrations, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, to make sure that the approach we take is helpful to them too and makes sense for all parts of the UK. We're also talking very much to business constituencies, investors and so on, and looking in some detail at different segments of the economy to see what works in which areas. So we are taking our time a bit, but I think it makes sense. And I think it also probably makes sense for the European Union to have a little bit of time, because I think the EU also needs to get itself together and work out the sort of approach it will also want to be taking, and what sort of relationship it would like to have with the UK after we leave the European Union. So we're doing that. What we do know is that, could we stop the voting? Must be one good one there, surely. Thank you. Maybe not even then one good one, but you never know. I'm always hopeful. Where was I? Yeah, what we do know is that you may have heard quite a lot of talk about models for a future relationship between the UK and the European Union, and you hear about, might the UK have the Norway model, or the Switzerland model, or someone else's model, Canada model, all sorts of different models that are out there for how the future relationship might work between the UK and the European Union. What we do know is that we don't want any of the off-the-shelf models. We would like a UK bespoke model, and we're taking some time to reflect on what that might look like, but that is clearly the direction in which the British government wants to head. So we're looking for a UK model of relationship with the European Union going forward. And we know it's not going to be all plain sailing, but we're quite optimistic. And your presentation, Peter, was quite optimistic and upbeat too, so that was music to my ears. But the UK is the 5th largest economy in the world, and I think we start from a position of some strength. Our employment rate is the highest it's been in our history. We have stable inflation. We have an economy. We were the fastest growing major economy last year. We have the lowest corporation tax in the G7, many advantages which makes the UK attractive to investors. And in fact, Ernst & Young did a survey to ask investors what were the factors that made them want to invest in the UK. And interestingly, access to EU markets, although of course we hope access to EU markets will continue anyway, but access to EU markets came 10th in the list. And factors that came above it were factors like quality of life, education, culture, language, regulatory environment, legal regulatory environment, political stability, and all sorts of factors, and skills, access to skills of a workforce. So many factors came above that. So just to say that we feel fairly optimistic, that's not the only, membership of the European Union would not be the only issue that investors will look at in investing in the UK. So we will see how that all moves going forward. But we feel encouraged that even since our referendum, a number of key investors have announced new investment into the UK. So, for example, SoftBank and GlaxoSmithKline and Siemens, all major investments announced just over this summer. So we do actually feel relatively positive, and at the same time we do see it also as an opportunity to develop our trading relationships with the rest of the world. And as you said, Petter, a lot of our trading and a lot of our exports go to the rest of the world and not to the European Union. And we've had a lot of interest from other countries in trying to develop new trading arrangements with us after we leave the European Union. So we approach it in a fairly positive and constructive, optimistic spirit. And what will it mean for our relationship with the Czech Republic? Well, while we've been members of the European Union, the UK and the Czech Republic have worked together incredibly closely. We're incredibly like-minded. We've worked together very closely on all kinds of competitiveness and growth issues, on deepening and completing the single market, and on free trade issues, as both as big trading nations. We've worked really closely on all of that agenda. And of course, while we, the UK, still remain a member of the EU, we very much support the EU's free trade agenda and support the efforts to conclude trading arrangements with other parts of the world. So we hope that all that positivity will continue. And certainly for the Czech Republic, the UK is the Czech Republic's 4th largest export market and 7th largest partner overall in terms of trade. So it would seem logical that it will be in the interest of the Czech Republic to have a really close relationship with the UK in terms of trade after we leave the European Union. It seems like that would be in both our interests to keep the trade and investment flowing in both directions as freely as it possibly can. And we know that the some of you Czechs, are very pragmatic, so we're confident that pragmatism will be at the heart of the Czech Republic and the Czech government's negotiating stance. And of course, the Czech Republic has recent experience of how to manage a very amicable constitutional divorce. So that may also prove useful. I think that's probably all I wanted to say. I can't give huge amounts of detail on what the UK is going to be looking for because we're still working that out, as I explained. But I thought I'd just give you a flavour of where we're at.
Okay. It's a great pleasure to be here. So thank you very much, British Embassy and Your Excellency for heading up, and British Chamber of Commerce for helping to organize this. My name is Milos Bartosek, and I work for the economics team as part of strategy and in our London office. As Czech national, it's a great pleasure to be here because of living in the UK for over 10 years. It's always good to come back and see and present from these perspectives. And secondly, I've been involved with advising clients on global expansion, trade deals, as well as attraction of foreign investment. So I hope that these topics are all of relevance to the Brexit debate, and I can hopefully comment more on these topics as we go along. Being a macroeconomist by training, but strategy consultant by trade, I always remind myself of the great quote by John Kenneth Gilbert, who said that there are two types of forecasters: ones who don't know, and second ones who don't know that they don't know. And I think that what we've heard about Brexit is actually that right now we really don't know, and it would be foolish to try to pretend that we know anything more that is already available. Instead, the way I would like to use the next 15 to 20 minutes is really support what Peter and Chandler are speaking about, and that is the point that the stakes are really high for both the EU as well as the UK. So there's real interest to get this right. And second of all, to remove this uncertainty that businesses like yours really don't like, UK should process with this process fairly quickly. So what I thought that I would touch upon are just very briefly to understand the results of the Brexit vote. What did the Leave campaign actually stood for? Then illustrate the height of the stakes between the EU and the UK economies, and then look briefly on what Brexit might look like, and explain why these off-the-shelf models are not applicable to the UK or potentially politically not feasible. Before I close off and speak about very briefly on how to be more resilient in this environment. So Brexit comes after 40 years of both economic and political integration between European nations and the UK. And when I spoke to some of my older colleagues in the UK firm and asked them what the UK was in the 1970s, they wouldn't say that it was at the height of the prosperity, but UK as a country has moved a great way along, and as Jan mentioned, it is really at the height of the economic development. So it's coming from a position of strength. So with that in mind, what the Leave campaign had to do, they didn't have that many economic arguments, so they had to resolve to more emotional appeal. And this appeal was centered around three main areas. One being taking back the control that EU is perceived to control a lot of our everyday life. But actually in reality, it's just a trade policy and some areas of regulations that the UK helped to shape themselves, especially in the financial era. Second of all, it was about how much money we have to give to the EU as a UK. As a percentage of GDP, that comes to about half a percentage point, which isn't that great deal, especially given that UK gets a lot of money for the universities and other parts of the economy which are important for the UK. And lastly, the Leave campaign questioned the ability of the EU as it stands right now to deal with the challenges that the 21st century really brings, and immigration is one of them. But the bottom line across this, for me, is that these themes are actually similar across other countries in the EU, and there is a real opportunity for the European Union to reconsider whether the model it currently has is fit for purpose, given the enlargement it has done and where it finds itself in today's world. This slide is quite complex, and it's complex for a reason, because I wanted to illustrate the importance of both EU to the UK and the UK to the EU. It's very true that UK is the fifth largest economy. It's very open to trade. It also welcomes a lot of investment, and also it's very welcoming to people from both the EU as well as other parts of the world. And with that in mind, it's actually interesting to consider the UK economy along the four freedoms that EU is based on. Those are the freedom of movement of goods, services, capital, and workers. The top part of the slide shows what goes out of the UK, and the bottom one shows what goes in. I will point out a couple of interesting points. The first one is that the exports of services are almost as big as exports of goods. And if you look at long-term projections, services will be actually as important as trade in goods for the UK going forward. And that really shows that UK is a very advanced economy where services are important. The other interesting fact is that if you deduct the imports from the exports, you arrive to the same point that Peter was making, that there is a trade deficit between UK that UK has, and therefore it needs to rely on inflows of capital, foreign direct investment. And UK has been very open to foreign direct investment. In addition to the deals that have been done in this in the weeks following the vote, we've also seen much stronger inflows of FDI, foreign direct investment, than the outflows out of the investments of the UK businesses. And then when we look at the importance of the EU, and ROW stands for rest of the world, we see that actually EU exports into the UK a lot. So EU countries such as Germany, France, Ireland have their own incentives to make sure that the Brexit happens in the right way and it doesn't stop their businesses who trade with the UK. And I mentioned the FDI importance, and that goes to a lot of German companies which are active and other companies from EU who find themselves finding UK very attractive model. And lastly, I would touch upon the fact about the work. I think that given how attractive the UK is, it's actually seen quite an inflow of people, and especially the growth rates over the past 5 years shows the benefit of its strong economic growth compared to the rest of the EU. And when you look at the breakdown of who actually comes to UK right now, it's the Spaniards and other young professionals from France, Italy, who find themselves not being able to grow as quickly in their home countries. So definitely UK is important for the EU. I will just quickly go also through a sectoral breakdown for the goods and the services, because this might appear quite general. We've done a set of analysis looking at what sort of level of tariffs do countries face if they are not in the EU, and what sort of goods does the UK export to the world, and their share of those exports into the EU. And when you look across the different sectors, actually automotive business is very exposed to the outcome of the Brexit negotiations, because it faces quite high WTO tariffs, and if Brexit is hard Brexit, then we need to consider the additional costs that British businesses might face. Of course, we've seen the currency depreciation, and that will help UK businesses. But definitely, these are some of the considerations that that Britain, as well as the companies in these sectors, have to have when it comes to Brexit. And secondly, on services. I think that we've seen a lot from the news that finance and insurance is incredibly important for the UK economy. Actually, almost a quarter of all value added in financial services generated in EU comes from the UK. And there's this big question about passporting and whether businesses and financial businesses being registered in the UK will be able to continue to operate in other parts of the EU. I'm reasonably upbeat on this. The legislation seems to be reasonably weighed for future negotiations, and there could be ways to work it out. But finance is incredibly important for the UK to get it right. Now, in terms of timelines, again, quite a bit on this slide. So let me walk you through it. If we look across the next 4 years, I think that Brexit needs to be seen in the political spectrum in what's happening in the rest of the EU. We have French and German elections coming up over the next 12 months, the Italian elections, and others. And therefore, there is a question: when will the Article 50 be actually involved, and when will it go in? Will it go in on the 1st of January, or will the UK wait until the French election, German election? There's currently a debate about what happens. And once you trigger the Article 50, there are 2 years for UK to figure out what its future will be with the EU. During this period, UK will not be able to negotiate with other countries about trade deals. So really, it has to wait up until 2019 or later to figure out these trade deals. And from history, we know that these trade deals do take quite some time. The EU-Canada deal has taken 7 years and it's still not ratified. So there's a lot to consider, and I would keep eyes open for what is happening in the key partner states of the EU, such as France and Germany. We touched upon the different models, and here I want to showcase why they are not politically and economically feasible. If we think of the free trade agreement that, for example, Canada will have with the EU, it only covers goods and some parts of services. And finance is really important, as I mentioned, for the UK, as well as other services. So it might not be really feasible. The Norwegian model is quite interesting, but Norway is actually the 10th biggest net contributor to the EU budget without having any rights to contribute to the regulation and how it's shaped. So again, it's not really that great. I learned that the Swiss model actually consists of 120 treaties and doesn't include services. And again, for what UK is, it really doesn't fit that well. And then the WTO is, I guess, the default form if all the negotiations were to break down. And that is to assume the tariffs and other things that countries which do not have a relationship, currently a trade relationship with the UK, might face. What we have done with my team in the UK is to take the free trade agreement and the WTO and look at how the different parts of the economy might be impacted and what factors might play out. And we see that compared to the contrafactual, so the point that UK would stay in the EU, we see that the free trade agreement could cause a drop of GDP up to 4% in the aftermath of leaving the EU. And if there was the WTO regulation or trade deal, then that could drop as low as 6%. And I think that the bottom line is that, is this really politically and economically feasible? No, not really. And therefore, a different deal needs to be struck. And that's why it takes so much time. So, in practice, what have we seen? We've seen the capital markets to actually rebound quite a bit. Both the FTSE 100, which includes many non-UK firms, actually more than the FTSE 250. I would just remind you that the Bank of England did the quantitative easing shortly after the vote, and that was to prop up asset prices. So that might be part of the reason. But one thing that seemed to have stuck was the depreciation against both the pound, the US dollar, as well as the euro. There are two things to keep in mind. It makes UK exports cheaper and more competitive, but it also increases the prices of raw materials. And whilst the inflation so far has been actually lower than expected, when you look at raw material inflation, it's been going up quite strongly. So for now, UK businesses are not passing through the increase in the prices onto the customers. What does this mean in the longer term? In line with the Bank of England, we foresee a slowdown in the economy. Our main scenario is not that there will be outright recession, so 2 quarters of a slowdown, consecutive quarters of slowdown. This is mainly driven by the fact that companies might postpone their investments whilst they wait for the decisions to be made and the uncertainty to be clear. And lastly, what can you do then whilst we wait? I think that it's important to review the exposure of your supply chain, whether for your customers as well as your distributors and suppliers. And it might not be your tier 1, it might be your tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers. And Mike will touch much more on the legal aspects of this. But also, there's a lot to be discussed about the employment and deployment of staff in the UK going forward. But as we don't know right now, I think that it's more about the contractual things that Mike will now speak about. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards.
So thank you very much. I run the legal practice at PwC here in the Czech Republic. You might notice that I have an American accent. I was born in the US, been living in the Czech Republic now for half my life, and I'm now a Czech citizen, so it also affects me quite a bit. On the legal aspects of Brexit, there's the general framework of the country leaving the EU. Okay. The treaty that's been mentioned is the Lisbon Treaty, Article 50, which regulates the exit of countries from the EU. It was mentioned that it's not sure when it will happen, maybe probably 2019 at the latest. The mechanics for that is that there will be negotiations between the UK and the EU on the terms of the exit, or 2 years after the UK notifies the European Council of its intention to leave. Okay, so the exact date that and the terms upon which the UK leaves is not clear, but is most likely to happen around 2019. So that's the international law aspect or sense of UK leaving the EU. How will that affect your contracts that you have between Czech or other EU-based companies and UK-based companies? The general principle is that contractual law is governed by state law. So it would be, there is such thing as EU law, but in commercial transactions between parties, it's usually governed by German law, Czech law, UK law. And there are no real provisions of the law that should affect your business. It's not going to change overnight. It will have to be changed by local regulations, so or local laws. So the UK will have to actually change their laws and for it to impact your contracts. But there are certain areas within your contracts, which is on the next slide, but there are certain areas in your existing contracts that will be affected by Brexit. We don't know how. It will depend on both the exit agreement and how UK law changes in the future. But if you have material contracts to your business with a UK counterparty where it's governed by UK law, or you have a large number of contracts with a counterparty, or there are contracts that will extend beyond 2019, you should look at that group of contracts carefully probably now. Now, what areas could change, and this relates to how you might look at your existing contract that you have with the UK counterparty. There's likely to be an increase in trade barriers. Okay? We've already seen that there's been fluctuations in currencies as Brexit approaches, or even during the Brexit negotiation process. There are likely to be fluctuations in price. So if you have a low margin business, maybe the automotive sector, which was mentioned earlier as being a particularly sensitive area, where you're a third tier provider of maybe plastic parts that has a very low margin and prices are affected by it, you may want to look at the price provisions of your contracts very carefully in terms of how it might affect your business going forward. Movement of persons. Right now, a Czech citizen can work in the UK with essentially no barriers. In the future, there may be some barriers. There's likely to be a transition period if any barriers are implemented again in local law after the terms of Brexit are negotiated. I mentioned the currency fluctuation, also the territorial scope of your agreements, especially in maybe a distribution agreement. You might have the terms of the agreement covering the EU. Well, now, what is the EU? You want to go back and look at those important agreements at least, and make sure you define the territorial scope. I mentioned that there's likely to be parallel regulatory schemes. That's legal talk for saying data protection rules in the UK might be different than data protection rules going forward in the EU. Same thing, competition law and many other sectors. And then changing the law itself. Probably the areas of law that will be subject to, that are maybe sensitive points for the UK and will be areas that are likely to change are in the competition law sector, data protection, consumer protection, and the various standards and approvals that have to be obtained to buy and sell goods in the EU versus the UK. Some people have asked, that they mentioned earlier, are my contracts valid now? Can I terminate my contract? The answer to that is, don't know, you have to look at the contract. But most contracts have a material adverse change or a force majeure clause, which means that if there's a material event that affects typically the essence of the contract, why the contract was made between the parties, then it allows the one or the other party to terminate the agreement. Right now, without the terms of Brexit having been finalized, it's not sufficiently clear as to whether there has been a material adverse change. We know that Brexit will happen by 2019, but we don't know how it will affect commercial counterparties. So a material adverse change or force majeure clause would not be able to be affected now. But if you are maybe signing contracts going into the future, important contracts for your business or many contracts that would in aggregate have a material impact on your business, you should consider the anticipated areas that might be affected by Brexit and consider whether you might want to introduce a special definition of a material adverse change that would affect the way Brexit could impact your business. Yeah, so, for example, if you're in the financial industry and maybe a tax is imposed on transactions that are done between the EU and the UK, you could, and that would affect the reason that you're signing the contract. You could include that into a material adverse change provision. Another common question is, well, okay, I have a contract with the UK counterparty. How will I enforce it in the future? Nothing will change there. Pre-Brexit, post-Brexit, every contract has a choice of law, has a dispute resolution clause. If it doesn't have that, there are default provisions that are the same in the EU and in UK national legislations. So there's no change there. And that's more or less it for my presentation. If you have any questions, specific questions regarding the legal impact, we're happy to ask, or even on the economic impact going forward.
Would it be worth mentioning the questionnaire that we have?
Sure.
We have prepared on your seats a quick questionnaire that of which the purpose is, I guess, normally we like to gather the views of the business. What is the feel in the room of Brexit, where Brexit, how it might impact your company? So I think that we have scheduled a couple minutes for that. You can do it now, or you can do it later also. And I guess we will continue with the panel discussion.
Thank you, guys. Now, the time for question, I'm sure there will be many, and the panelists, Janet and myself, will try to do some sensible answers. So the floor is yours. Questions from the audience? Yeah.
I'm interested in the source of data
Which data? From Pricewaterhouse?
which presented the data that how much business is done
In my presentation, it was the EU statistical office plus the UK statistical office. And
you said the views are different.
yes. Well, that I had one from the UK, those who showed the deficits. So if you look at the EU data, the deficit is much lower. I.e., they say that the UK is not exporting or importing that much from the EU, i.e., I think about 10 billion is the difference. So say UK says the deficit is 40, the EU says 30, give or take. Yes, no?
Hi, Michael. I'd like to ask you, talking about whether
Brexit will constitute a force majeure.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering, in future contracts over the next 12, 24 months, are you going to end up in these contracts with something like a Brexit clause? Are people going to start demanding this? And if so, this is obviously going to benefit lawyers and maybe consultancies like yourself. And you could be one of the winners out of Brexit, maybe, with this.
Well, actually, that's a good question, and I remember the year 2000, and there was a time when people thought the world was going to end January 1st, 2000, and even creative lawyers started looking at material adverse change clauses and suggesting that if the world collapses on January 1st, 2000, that the contract would no longer be valid, etc. I don't think that will happen with Brexit at this point, unless the terms of, and I highlighted it in my presentation, unless the terms that are leaked during the negotiation process suggest that the direction of Brexit could affect somebody's business significantly. Right now, I don't think that as has been presented here today, it's not in the interest of either party to make the exit go badly, and so we shouldn't anticipate that in the contracts that in fact there will be a necessity to negotiate material adverse change clause. So, for example, if I were representing a client against which a counterparty was trying to introduce a Brexit clause, I would use that argumentation and say the change that will happen as a result of Brexit is likely not to, in a business sense, be of the category of a material adverse change, unless you tell me specifically what you're nervous about, and the person is not going to be able to tell them because they won't be able to argue against because they won't know the terms of the Brexit. Yeah. So my sense is it's not going to be a boon for the legal business.
Could you imagine the scenario that UK will set Article 15, they will start negotiate, very likely including nothing favorable for UK, otherwise it will run under a set of referendum across EU, because why not to pick up cherries, and then after they will bring the outcomes, they will set a new referendum about the outcome, because right now referendum was about the unclear outcome. Nobody knew what Brexit actually means, what does it mean for UK. So would it be a chance that they will set a new referendum after 2 years?
Oh, is that I mean, UK Prime Minister Theresa May has been clear there won't be a second referendum.
Right now, after the
Yeah.
first
If you
one.
want scenario planning, I can't tell you that. I'm just telling the position of the British government is there won't be another referendum. There's no plan for a second referendum. That's kind of the position as of now.
Yeah, but this was as an outcome of the very strong, let's say after strong feelings after the first one. But now nobody knows what Brexit is. So I think they should bring again this question to the table when they will show to people, okay, this is Brexit. We have the outcome of our negotiations. So let's decide whether you want this kind of Brexit. Because right now,
Yeah.
makes sense. to me.
You're not the only person who said that. Many commentators have offered that advice and opinion as well.
I mean, what we can see in the UK courts, they're currently looking at the point whether Theresa May has to ask the Parliament for approval to trigger Article 50. That decision will come, I think, that in December, later this year, but we don't know. And I think that it would be wide speculation, and there are a lot of these possible ways that people try to think it through. What we tried to do with our 4 scenarios was to look at the different options that were off the shelf, ready for the UK, and the conclusion is that because of the size and importance of the UK, they are not really suitable. So we just have to wait and see.
We also know there's a sort of petition or the re-referendum, if you will. There's no strong desire to go for a new referendum, if I can say that. And also given the strong historical, constitutional, unwritten constitution and legal history of the UK, I don't think that people try to revoke the decision of the people, despite the fact that not everyone actually probably knew what were the consequences. And just out of curiosity, when we first considered organizing the seminar on Brexit in May, we didn't think we would need one. And I think it was a bit of a surprise to everyone.
And one thing I didn't mention on the slide with all those flags and all those, the timeline, one thing that Theresa May also stick to is that the next election will be in 2020, so it's unlikely that there will be a new election that might bring different cabinet.
And it's probably worth adding that, I mean, there are certainly those who, as you're saying, that are also are saying there should be another referendum, the people were hoodwinked and therefore they should have their say again. I think maybe perhaps what I was alluding to at the beginning, saying there was a very clear mandate from the referendum. I think almost the majority of people on either side of the debate, the people who campaigned on either side of the debate, whether they liked the outcome or not, they accept it. And somehow in the UK we pride ourselves on our democratic tradition, and people spoke. A lot of people didn't like the result, but it's going ahead, and that's kind of why I was saying Brexit is happening, because that's certainly the intention of the British government now, to respect that. And Theresa May herself was not a campaigner for Brexit. She was on the Remain side of the argument, but she has been very clear that she respects the democratic wish which the British people expressed.
Correct as a question, because I have a similar question on Brexit. It's not about maybe Brexit is yes or not, but you presented a few options how to continue with Brexit. And in this aspect, I think it would be good to ask people, the nation, which way they would like to continue. If you started with the referendum way of doing politics, maybe it would be good to ask people which way they would like to go, and not to just ask Brexit yes or not, and now government will decide which way to follow. They would be democracy.
Yeah, I'm just a lawyer, but I think generally, if you look at it from a political sense, you can't allow the populace to decide everything, every small minutia. And so part of the role of a politician is they have the authority from the populace to make decisions that affect us all. And I think that's what happened in this case with Brexit, is they were given the authority now to negotiate the terms of the exit. And that's kind of one of the principles of democracy is, yeah, you give the voters the power to vote, but you don't let them decide everything in all of the details.
Yeah, hello, Stephen Ridgway from the British Chamber of Commerce. Thanks a lot for the presentation. There's a lot of talk about what the Czech Republic thinks about Brexit and what the relationship with the Czech Republic is with the UK. But my question is, in these two sides, as we've been calling them, presumably the UK is going to be negotiating with the EU, not with the Czech Republic. So how influential is the voice of each member state in the negotiation? Who is the UK going to be negotiating with? And specifically with regards to the Czech Republic. And the second thing is the default seems to be getting more and more influence within the EU, and the leaders of the countries within the default seem to communicate with each other before big announcements on the EU and so on. So how important is the default going to be in this negotiation?
I don't know who's best qualified to answer this question. I mean, I can answer the bit about who will the UK be negotiating. Well, I can answer it to say that it's unclear who the UK will be negotiating with specifically. And maybe that's what I was alluding to a little bit at the beginning when I said, yes, the UK is taking its time in invoking Article 50, But maybe, well, it certainly makes sense for us to do that, and it possibly makes sense for the EU as well, because the EU too needs a little bit of time to work out how it will conduct these negotiations and what sort of approach it might take in them. And I think, to go to your question, I think there's some debate in the EU about exactly what role there will be for the member states, for the European Council, for the European Commission. Various people are being appointed to roles as part of a sort of negotiating team or to be part of a team that's involved in those negotiations. But I think there's not full clarity at this stage of exactly who will be doing the negotiating, where the instructions will come from, who will take the decisions. Clearly, all 27 remaining EU member states will be involved in this. That's clear and that's set down. But exactly how the mechanics of that work, I think, is still to be determined. And in terms of the V4, someone else may also want to comment on this. The V4, certainly in our experience, has often played a role in coming together to have common positions on various issues. Whether it will do so in the case of Brexit negotiations, we don't yet know, unless anyone knows any different.
What I would just add to that is tomorrow the 27, so 28 minus 1, are meeting in Bratislava, the Prime Ministers and Chancellors. And that's the first time that they are meeting without the UK to actually agree on what are the priorities. And it will be, I guess, the first of very many meetings. You've got the European Commission and the European Council that might have the negotiating powers on behalf of the 27 countries. So that's one thing. The second thing is with the V4. These 4 countries are reasonably small, so it makes sense that they come together and they agree their negotiating stand. I guess just pure numbers make this clear. And the third thing I would mention, I'm now based for the past 2 weeks in Norway, and speaking to people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they have their own Brexit team, subcommittee, and they mentioned that every single country has that as well. So I think that right now everyone is figuring out, okay, what is in this for ourselves? What are our negotiating priorities? What do we bring to the table? So again, I mean, it's not very useful that we're just saying, look, no one knows, and there's still time to do all these things. But that's what's happening right now.
I think I'm going to freedom to speculate just a bit. And it seems that the member states and the national governments, they want to be more in the driving seat rather than allowing the European Commission to drive the negotiations. And I'm speaking to Peter Carroll, speaking about an institution, because apparently the heads of the states have more interest in keeping Britain as a good friend, as a good trading partner, whereas there are some forces in the Commission that they are spoiling our party, and they might be a bad example to other member states. So even Hollande and Merkel, they want to be involved directly rather than having a European Commission to negotiate the deal. But that's sort of how I feel about this. And I'm sure Jack will comment.
I would like to maybe for a second come back to the question which was about democracy and what was selected by the people. As it was said, probably none of these 4 scenarios is going to happen. They'll be looking for the UK way of how to make a Brexit. But let's assume theoretically that at the end of the day will be the best UK way to find out that there is no Brexit. And if this theoretically will happen, is there a chance that this could happen, or you'll be trying to search for the kind of UK way for any price? Because as well as support what you just said, there might be different kind of tension, different interests from independent from each of the EU state or as a member together. So what it happens that really in the case at the end of the day to figure out there is the best way is no Brexit.
I mean, we're in the realm of kind of deep speculation now, so it's quite difficult for me to say very much. I mean, the British government is confident that it can find a way through these negotiations that will be win-win, because as we've all been saying, it's in the interests of the UK and of
the European Union, that this is a win-win kind of solution. It's in the interest that it goes smoothly and is amicable and comes to a solution that meets the needs of both sides. So we're fairly confident that can be delivered with all the best minds available in the UK and the EU to try and deliver it. If you came to some outcome in the end where there was a conclusion that everything was impossible and therefore you shouldn't have Brexit, I mean, I can't really speculate about it. I mean, the British people voted. I think all I can say is the result of our referendum was, there was a high turnout and it was a clear outcome. And the expectation is that we're going ahead and pursuing Brexit. If there was some recommendation that shouldn't happen, obviously everything's up for grabs again.
Oh, I know it's kind of like more provocative, but that would be kind of really fair to the people, as it was said before here, that after 1 year or something, so this is the price for the Brexit, you go for it, and then it's introduced all the pros and cons to the public. This is what we vote for. So
I guess
this was not done before,
yeah, what's clear, the one thing that is clear is that the negotiations, once the Article 50 is triggered, is 2 years. After those 2 years, you have to ask the other 27 countries whether they want to continue negotiating, and every single one has to agree. And I've highlighted only some of the elections, and there are a lot of other ones happening. So there is a very big speculation whether everyone would want to continue with the negotiations. So I think that yes, we are in very deep speculative territory with this one. But logically, there is some logic to it, and I think that given the stakes that are in play, logic hopefully will prevail. But we need to wait and see.
I'd like to touch on the economic outlook a little bit. I think one of the things that global corporates dislike is uncertainty. And the longer the uncertainty persists, actually the more likely it is that they will develop their contingency plans and in fact implement their contingency plans to remove that uncertainty from their global business model. We talk to a lot of global corporates, and we're already seeing that, right? To retain access to EU markets, etc. So, notwithstanding what you just said about the 2-year period, my understanding is that the UK has to finalise its negotiating position, has to invoke Article 50. There is a media speculation about a dearth of negotiating talent within the UK to engage in EU negotiations. I suspect there is also a need to engage with negotiations with a number of other non-EU countries to ensure trade treaties can be put in place. There's also a need to negotiate with the WTO members to establish our terms with the WTO. And then looking at the timeline of events in EU countries politically over the next 2 or 3 years, it does appear that there's going to be other priorities for EU member states in the next few years as well, with a potential change in regime in those countries. And presumably at the end of that 2-year period, a need for all EU member states to actually agree on the outcome, right, on the terms offered to the UK. So what is the risk that this period of uncertainty will actually extend far beyond 2019 into 2020, into 2021? And what is the downside risk, therefore, to the UK economy of that uncertainty?
Yeah. This is, again, reasonably speculative, but I will attempt to answer it by looking at the structure of the UK economy. Investment is incredibly important, together with consumer spending for the economy, given how far developed the economy is. So if we see a prolonged period of very reduced investment, it will hit the GDP very, very strongly, and we will no doubt enter recession. If this is in the scenario that the investment really goes down, and we haven't seen the first numbers in the investment levels will be out in November. But because of the importance of investment, if investment by the corporates is being cut quarter on quarter consistently, recession will come, and the government will need to respond to that. We have the autumn statement coming up very shortly, where
potentially new stimulus might be offered to the economy, especially around infrastructure investments. But I think that there is a limited amount of the wiggle room for the UK government to substitute the private investments, and that leads you to a prolonged period of recession if the investment continues to drop. There is political cost associated to that, and then we get to the speculations on how much are you willing to bear before the next election, which is in 2020. So it's very, very speculative, but investment is incredibly important for the UK economy. And right now, we lack the exact data to see. We haven't seen any proper data on the response of the investments. There's been some snippets, such as the SoftBank and other companies, actually wanting to buy the UK businesses, which are suddenly 15% cheaper from day to day. Yeah. So whether we will see this prolonged period of investment drops, that's a big question mark, because I guess this is also about the risk reward, right? Businesses got used to a certain amount of risk in Europe and a certain amount of reward. And I think that as Brexit enters everyday life, we might have to get used to higher amount of uncertainty. And as you said, businesses might actually develop, before the negotiations are done, their extra plans for this.
Just a quick follow-on question
Yeah.
to that then. Given the importance of that uncertainty,
Yeah.
the question for Jan, it's early days, but is there a sort of a strategic communication plan to address these points as they become more fleshed out over the course of the coming years, particularly in the divergent, the important issues of border control versus access to EU markets? I think access to EU markets is something that clearly businesses are going to be looking for a signal on at an early stage. Is there a strategic communication plan for the business community?
Yes. There's a huge amount of work going on that. It's taken a little bit of time to get going, partly because there were machinery of government changes in the UK, as I alluded to earlier, and changes in government departments handling all these things. But that's now ramped up very much, and there is very much a programme worked out, and consultations, messaging, and all that sort of thing. So I think we could label that a strategic communication plan, yeah. And there's certainly consciousness that that needs to happen.
Also based on Scotland, I think this is the material change, Brexit, which enables them to reopen the referendum. Is there a baseline that they will really do, because I really can imagine why not.
I mean, Scotland voted 2 years ago fairly clearly in a referendum and voted to remain part of the UK. And it's fair to say that a majority of Scots voted to stay in the European Union in our most recent referendum. But I mean, you could say the same of parts of England or parts of other constituent parts of the UK, and this was a national vote. So I think Theresa May went to Scotland as her first visit as soon as she was appointed. She went up to Edinburgh to see Nicola Sturgeon, First Minister of Scotland, and talked to her about the need, her determination to make sure that Brexit worked for all constituent parts of the UK, including Scotland, and her conviction too that it was in Scotland's interest to remain part of the UK through all of this. Recent surveys, for what it's worth, recent surveys have suggested that if a referendum were held today, again in Scotland, the outcome would not be that much different. So I can't predict what would happen in the future, but there's certainly no plans for another referendum at the moment, nor is the Scottish National Party in government in Scotland, nor do they have any immediate plans for one. But obviously there's been talk about it in speculation, you're quite right.
Yes, Chris?
With individuals, is there a treaty that says that as a result of changing the treaty, an individual can't be disadvantaged? So this is thinking about pensions, where if you're a EU citizen, it's better health in the Czech Republic or in the UK. Is there such a convention?
there's not such a convention, but the terms of for example, Social Security and other benefits will be part of the Brexit negotiations. So it's not, again, it's not known right now how that will work out, but it's likely to be similar to, I think, what's already being discussed on the freedom of working in the UK for EU nationals. There will be a transitionary period for EU citizens that are working in the UK now and had been working up until Brexit is decided. There will be a certain regime for them versus people that want to go to work in the UK after Brexit. So there's likely for health benefits and Social Security benefits going to be a similar transitionary regime.
But you could imagine a UK, say a Czech in the UK, he's worked there for 4 years, he would expect to add all the EU pensions together and get a UK pension under those circumstances. He might even be in payment. They couldn't take it away.
It will depend on the terms of the negotiation. I don't think we can say now whether they'll be able to take it away or not. But my guess is, as I said, that there will be not an exception, but a special regime for those that are in the UK now and are there up until Brexit versus those who want to go afterward.
No questions from the audience? I'd like to have one. Because many of us do work in financial services, and financial services are a very important part of the British economy. Of course, and again, this is a little bit of speculation, but how do you see single license and for example, activities of Frankfurt or Paris to attract the key present financial markets? Do you think any changes will happen, or does the situation remain as it is today?
I think that it would be foolish to think that the banks and other financial corporations are not thinking about their contingency plans. And you're right, Vilnius and Frankfurt and other towns are almost weekly in London trying to showcase their ability to attract these people. I think that what's important from economic theory is to look at cluster theory, and the good old Marshall theory suggests that it's not only about the incentives, but you need the critical mass and also the socio-economic environment. And I think that London has much more to offer than just a professional setting. And if we look at, for example, how the finance regulation has been drafted in EU, UK actually plays a very important and pragmatic role of open market. And I don't think that overnight London, or even by 2019, will lose its attractiveness. Because the passporting issue is relevant only to some parts of the finance industry, and I think that you still want to be, as a global business, in London and have presence. You might need to ship a desk or two to Frankfurt. But what we are seeing now is that a lot of the treaties, as they have been written, for example, MiFID, when it comes to regulation of alternatives, is that they allow a third-party access for countries which are outside the EU. And I think that it will take time, but the negotiations will likely result in some sort of a custom solution for the finance sector because of its importance for both the EU as well as the UK. So I'm reasonably upbeat on the position of London and its ability to innovate and the regulatory space within which they are able to create it. But then I'm also not a finance lawyer,
I don't know whether you have something to add, Mike, on the finance side of things.
No, I agree with you completely on kind of your general conclusion. London was a financial center before the UK, before the EU, and they will continue to be a financial center if and after they leave, or after they leave the EU. Maybe there could be some impacts on the economic side where, as was mentioned, if there's lower investment in the UK, if the UK dips into recession, there could be an impact within the EU in the sense of the ability to obtain financing, may even make it easier to obtain financing if the UK goes into recession.
Okay. Any last questions? Anything answered? Okay, so thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I think you still have the questionnaire if you can fill out during the networking or whatever. I think Russell Charles would be delighted if you could fill that out. This questionnaire, I think, will be available for the participants, so you'll be able to see it later yourselves. And I'd like to invite you to join us for drinks and little reception over there. Thank you very much. See you soon.